My brother didn't just assume he would inherit the ranch. He practiced his victory speech in the mirror, while my parents handed him the empire like I was just hired help. I walked out with nothing but dust on my boots. Then my phone buzzed with a recorded title deed. That was the moment I realized they might own the fences and the logo, but I owned the 580 acres that kept their cattle alive. My name is Morgan Brooks, and at 34 years old, I found myself sitting at the head of a table that felt less like a piece of furniture and more like an execution block. It was a massive slab of polished pine that dominated the main office of Callahan Ranch, a room that smelled aggressively of lemon polish, stale cigar smoke, and the expensive leather of my father's chair. This was not a funeral. No one had died, at least not in the biological sense. My parents had called this a succession meeting, a corporate term they had picked up from one of those business seminars they paid thousands of dollars to attend in Denver. But as I sat there, watching a dust mote float through a beam of harsh afternoon sunlight, I knew exactly what this was. It was a surgery. They were about to cut the limb off to save the image, and I was the limb. My father sat opposite me. He looked uncomfortable, which was rare for a man who could stare down a charging bull. He cleared his throat, a sound that rumbled deep in his chest, and placed his hand on a thick blue folder. It was the only thing on the table. "Morgan," he said, his voice dropping an octave to that serious tone he usually reserved for bankers and sheriffs. "We have been doing a lot of thinking about the future, about the legacy of Callahan Ranch." He did not look at me when he said it. He looked at the folder. Then, with a slow, deliberate slide that sounded like dry skin rubbing against wood, he pushed the blue folder across the table. It did not come to me. It bypassed me completely and landed in front of my brother. Troy. Troy was sitting to my right, leaning back in his chair with the casual arrogance of a man who had already read the script. He picked up the folder like it was a menu at a diner. He was wearing his best cowboy hat, the one with the pristine white felt that had never seen a day of actual work, and he smirked. "The plan," my father continued, finally looking at me with eyes that were hard and unyielding, "is to consolidate the leadership, effective immediately. The entire operation of Callahan Ranch, including the brand rights, the commercial cattle herd, and the new equestrian tourism contracts, will be transferred to Troy's name. He is going to be the managing director." I felt the air leave the room. It was not a surprise, not really, but hearing it out loud was like taking a kick to the ribs from a spooked horse. I looked at Troy. He had already opened the folder and was thumbing through the documents, nodding as if he understood the legal jargon on the pages. "Thanks, Dad," Troy said, his voice loud and booming. He took his hat off and hooked it on the back of his chair, running a hand through hair that was perfectly styled. "I have got big ideas for this place. I mean, huge. We are going to pivot. No more of this old-school dirt farming. I am talking about a luxury destination, glamping yurts, high-end trail rides with wine tasting. We turn Callahan Ranch into an empire." He turned to me, his grin widening until it showed too many teeth. "And do not worry, Morgan, I am not leaving you out in the cold. If you want to stay on, I could use someone to handle the grunt work. You know, making sure the stalls are mucked out, checking the fences, like a barn manager. I will even keep you on salary. Barn manager. I had spent the last 7 years managing the hydrology reports. I had spent my 20s analyzing soil density and rotational grazing patterns to keep this land from turning into a dust bowl. And now, the man who thought rotational grazing meant spinning his horse in a circle was offering me a job cleaning up manure. Then my mother spoke. She was sitting next to my father, her posture rigid. She did not look at me either. She was busy smoothing out the wrinkles in her linen trousers. "We think it is for the best. Morgan," she said, her voice sharp and cold, cutting through the thick air. She reached into her purse and pulled out a white envelope. She slid it across the polished pine toward me. It looked tiny on the massive table. "This is for you," she said. "Consider it compensation for your efforts over the years, a severance, if you will. We know how much you love the land, but honestly, dear, you are just too sensitive. You get too emotional about every little thing. You are obsessed with the grass and the dirt. You lack the vision to be a real ranch owner. Troy has the charisma. You have, well, you have a tendency to overcomplicate things. I looked at the envelope. I did not need to open it to know it was a check, and I did not need to see the number to know it was insulting. It was probably enough to buy a used car. Maybe rent an apartment in town for 3 months. It was go-away money. Now, I want to pause here for a second. I want to talk to you, the person listening to this story. I want you to picture this moment. You have given a decade of your life to a family business. You have sacrificed your social life, your relationships, and your sleep to keep their assets afloat. And in return, they hand your legacy to the golden child who spent those same years partying in college. And they hand you a check that would not even cover the cost of the new irrigation system you installed last spring. If you are listening to this, tell me in the comments where you are right now. Are you in Ohio? Are you in Oregon? Are you sitting in a parking lot dreading going into a job where you are undervalued? Because if you are, you know exactly what happened to my heart rate in that moment. You might think I exploded. You might think I flipped that polished pine table over and screamed until the windows rattled. That is what they do in the movies, right? But I did not. My heart rate did not even spike. In fact, it slowed down. It went cold. Inside my head, I was not looking at my parents or my brother. I was looking back at the drought of 2018. I was remembering the way the heat waves shimmered off the dry creek beds. I was remembering standing next to my grandfather, Elias, watching the cattle bawl because their tongues were swollen from thirst. I remembered being the only one there. Troy was on a ski trip. My parents were at a golf resort in Arizona. It was just me and an 80-year-old man hauling buckets of water from the emergency reserve because the main pumps had failed. I learned something that summer. I learned that anger does not make it rain. Panicking does not fix a broken pipe. You just do the work. You conserve your energy. You wait. So, looking at my mother's cold face and my brother's smug grin, I did exactly what the land had taught me to do. I went dormant. I did not touch the envelope. I did not look at the check. I simply planted my boots on the floorboards. I took a breath that tasted of lemon polish and betrayal, and I stood up. The legs of my heavy wooden chair scraped against the hardwood floor. It was a loud, jarring screech that cut right through Troy's monologue about luxury yurts. He stopped talking. My father flinched. My mother finally looked up at me, her eyes widening slightly, waiting for the tantrum she was convinced was coming. I looked at them. I looked at the family that saw me as nothing more than a piece of equipment that had depreciated in value. Understood, I said. That was it. One word. No arguments, no tears, no begging for my birthright. I turned around and walked toward the heavy oak door. Behind me, the silence stretched for a heartbeat, and then I heard the distinct clink of crystal glass. They were pouring whiskey. They were toasting. The problem had been removed. The sensitive daughter was gone, and the empire was safe. I walked out of the house that my great-grandfather had built, down the stone steps, and into the blinding brightness of the afternoon. The heat hit me like a physical blow. It was 90 degrees in the shade, and the air was thick with the smell of sagebrush and dry earth. I walked across the gravel driveway to my truck, a battered Ford pickup that had more rust than paint. My hands were shaking now. I looked down at them as I fumbled for my keys. They were trembling violently. It was a mix of adrenaline, humiliation, and something else, something strange. It was relief. For the first time in my life, I did not have to worry about the hay prices. I did not have to worry about the south fence line that was leaning. I did not have to carry the weight of their expectations or their failures. I was free. I was unemployed, homeless, and disowned. But I was free. I climbed into the cab of the truck. The interior was baking hot. The steering wheel burned my palms. I jammed the key into the ignition. But before I could turn it, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a single, sharp vibration against the hard plastic. I stared at it. I almost didn't pick it up. I assumed it was a text from my mother, maybe adding a final insult, or perhaps a notification from the bank telling me that my corporate credit card had been canceled. but the screen was lit up with a notification I did not recognize. It was an email from Mesa County Recorder's Office. Subject: recorded title deed. Morgan Brooks. I frowned. I sat there in the sweltering heat of the cab, sweat trickling down my temple, and tapped the notification. My finger hovered over the screen. I had not bought any property. I did not have the money to buy property. The email opened. It was an automated message, confirming that a document had been officially recorded in the county archives. Attached was a PDF file. My curiosity won over my misery. I opened the file. The document loaded slowly on the poor cellular connection, rendering line by line. It was a warranty deed, standard legal font, lots of whereas and hereby, but my eyes locked onto the box in the center of the page. The section labeled Grantee Owner, there, typed in bold, black letters, was my name, Morgan E. Brooks, and above it, the description of the property. Legal description: North Spring Parcel, Township 4 South, Range 97 West, containing 580 acres, more or less. The world stopped spinning. The sound of the wind in the cottonwood trees faded away. The heat in the truck vanished. I knew the North Spring Parcel. Everyone knew the North Spring Parcel. It was the heart of the ranch's upper range. It was the land that sat at the highest elevation of the valley. But more importantly, it was the land that held the deep aquifer. I reread the document. The date of the transfer was from 3 years ago. The signature of the grantor at the bottom of the page was shaky, written in blue ink that wavered but remained defiant. Elias Callahan, my grandfather. I sat there, staring at the screen until the numbers blurred. 580 acres. My brother was inside that house right now, clinking a glass of expensive whiskey, celebrating his ownership of the Callahan Ranch brand. He owned the logo on the gate. He owned the trucks. He owned the contracts with the travel agencies. He owned the fences that lined the highway. But as I looked at the map attached to the deed, tracing the boundary lines with my thumb, a cold, terrifying realization washed over me. Troy owned the cows, but I owned the water they drank, and I owned the grass they were standing on. I looked back at the house, looming large and imposing against the blue sky. They thought they had just thrown out the hired help. They had no idea they had just handed the title deed to the landlord. I shifted the truck into drive, the tires crunching heavily over the gravel as I rolled away from the main house. I did not look back. I knew exactly what was happening behind those double oak doors. My mother was likely already planning the catering for Troy's celebratory dinner, and my father was probably calling the bank to boast about the new, dynamic leadership of Callahan Ranch. They were celebrating a victory. They had no idea they were standing on a trapdoor. As the house shrank in my rearview mirror, fading into a blur of heat haze and dust, my mind did not stay in the present. It drifted back. It went back to the reason I was so sure, so arrogant in my belief that they could never actually get rid of me. I thought I was indispensable because I was the only one who knew how the machine worked. I remembered the summer I turned 13. It was the middle of August, the kind of heat that makes the air feel solid, like you are walking through warm syrup. My grandfather, Elias, had thrown me into his old Jeep, a rattletrap of a vehicle that smelled of gasoline and wet dog, and driven me up the steep, rocky trail to the North Spring. Troy was back at the house that day. I think he was playing video games in the air conditioning. Or maybe he was at the pool with his friends. He hated the dust. He hated the way the heat made his shirt stick to his back. But I loved it. I loved being with Elias. We stopped at a ridge overlooking the northern pasture. It was a rugged, unforgiving piece of land, full of sagebrush and limestone outcroppings. Elias cut the engine, and the silence of the high desert rushed in to fill the cab. He pointed a gnarled finger toward a cluster of cottonwood trees in the distance, their leaves a vibrant, shocking green against the brown landscape. "You see that?" "Morgan," he asked, his voice raspy from decades of inhaling cattle dust. "That is the heartbeat." He told me about the aquifer beneath us. He explained that 20 years prior, during a drought that had bankrupted half the ranchers in the county, This specific spot was the only reason the Callahans did not lose everything. The water here came from deep underground, filtered through layers of limestone that kept it flowing even when the sky refused to rain for 6 months straight. He turned to me, his blue eyes sharp and serious. Anyone can own land, Morgan. You just pay the tax man. But owning the land does not mean you know it. Who understands water understands the land. If you do not know where the water goes, you do not own a ranch. You just own a graveyard waiting to happen. He taught me to read the ground like a book. He showed me how to look at the cracks in the dry mud to predict soil stability. He taught me to watch the color of the grama grass. If it turned a certain shade of gray-green, it meant the root systems were shrinking, pulling back in self-defense. He taught me to measure the evaporation rate on the water troughs just by looking at the condensation rings in the morning. Troy never learned those things. Troy learned how to shake hands at the Chamber of Commerce. Troy learned how to wear a bolo tie and charm investors. But he could not tell the difference between invasive cheatgrass and native wheatgrass if his life depended on it. That was why I left. When I graduated high school, I got as far away from the family politics as I could. I earned a degree in rangeland ecology. I wanted the science to back up what Elias had taught me by instinct. I landed a job at Terra Vista Range Analytics, a firm that specialized in rehabilitating damaged ecosystems. I was good at it. I was traveling all over the West, consulting for massive land trusts, writing plans that saved thousands of acres from desertification. I had a career. I had a 401k. I had respect. But then, 5 years ago, Elias had his first stroke. I came home for a weekend visit, and what I saw terrified me. The ranch was dying. My father and Troy were running it into the ground. They were overstocking the herds to capitalize on high beef prices, ignoring the carrying capacity of the land. The pastures were grazed down to the nub. The soil was eroding. The creek beds were trampled into sludge. I quit my job at Terra Vista the next week. I moved back into the small cabin on the edge of the property, taking a pay cut that would make anyone laugh, just to save the legacy Elias had built. I spent the last 7 years fighting a war against incompetence. I vividly remember sitting at the kitchen table late one night, surrounded by topographical maps and spreadsheets. I was mapping out a rotational grazing plan, a complex system where we would move the cattle every 3 days to allow the grass to recover. I was calculating forage density, measuring biomass per acre, and trying to convince my father that we needed to reduce the herd size by 15% to save the soil for next year. While I was doing that, Troy walked in. He was wearing pristine boots and holding a beer. He looked at my maps and laughed. "You are overcomplicating it, little sister," he said. "Cows eat grass. When the grass is gone, we buy hay. It is simple math." He did not understand that buying hay for 2,000 head of cattle would bankrupt us in 6 months. He did not care. The next day, he drove out to the pasture I had just spent a week rehabilitating. He did not go there to check the soil moisture. He went there to take a picture. I saw it on Instagram later that evening. It was a photo of him sitting on his horse, silhouetted against the sunset, looking rugged and commanding. The caption read, "Another long day in the saddle, keeping the legacy alive. Boss life." He had been in the saddle for 20 minutes. I had been out there since 4 in the morning, dragging polyethylene pipe through the mud to set up a temporary water line so the cattle would not destroy the creek bank. That was the dynamic. I was the mechanic in the engine room, covered in grease and sweat, keeping the ship moving. Troy was the captain on the deck, wearing the white uniform and waving to the crowd. I was the one who woke up at 2 in the morning when the temperature dropped to 10 degrees below zero because the heater in the calving barn had failed. I was the one wading through freezing mud, my hands numb, pulling a calf out of a heifer that was too small to birth it. I was the one who drove the truck to town to argue with the feed store manager about the protein content of our supplements. And the paperwork. God. The paperwork. Every single environmental compliance report sent to the bank in the last 5 years had been prepared by me. Every grant application for water conservation funding had been written by me. I used my credentials, my background with Terra Vista, to give our reports legitimacy. I remember my mother standing over my shoulder while I filled out a loan application 2 years ago. We needed capital to repair the main barn roof. The bank required a sustainability assessment. Make it look good. Morgan, she had said, sipping her iced tea. Use all those fancy science words you learned at college. Just make sure they give us the money. When I tried to explain to her that the data showed we were dangerously close to depleting our water rights, she waved a hand dismissively. You worry too much, she said. You are always so dramatic about the water. The land has supported us since your great-grandfather's time. It is not going to run out now. You really need to stop overthinking everything. It is unbecoming. Overthinking. That was their favorite word for me. When I warned them about the invasive weeds, I was overthinking. When I told them the soil pH was unbalanced, I was overthinking. But when the loan officer approved the financing based solely on the comprehensive ecological management plan attached to the application, they did not complain about my overthinking then. They just took the money and bought a new horse trailer. Now, driving down this bumpy county road, the irony tasted like copper in my mouth. They had fired the scientist, but they had kept the science, or so they thought. I pulled the truck over to the side of the road. I needed to see it again. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from a sudden, jarring spike of adrenaline. I unlocked my phone and opened that PDF file again. I zoomed in on the map. The legal description was dry and boring, but the lines on the digital map screamed at me. The North Spring parcel, 580 acres. It was shaped like a jagged puzzle piece right in the center of the ranch's northern territory. I traced the boundaries with my finger. Here, in the northeast corner of the parcel, was the Big Bore well. It was the primary industrial pump that fed the irrigation pivots for the winter hayfields. Here, in the center, was the North Spring itself, the unshakable, eternal source of water that Elias had shown me. And here, running right through the southern edge of the parcel, was a long, thin gray line. That line was County Road 44, or rather, the private extension of it. It was the only access road that connected the lower winter pastures where the barns and the main house were to the upper summer grazing lands. I sat back against the headrest, the breath leaving my lungs in a rush. If this map was accurate, if I truly owned this 580 acres, then Troy did not just lose a piece of land. He lost the jugular vein of the entire operation. Without the Big Bore well, there is no hay for winter. Without the North Spring, there is no water for the cattle in the summer. And without that road, you would need a helicopter to move the herd from the barns to the grass. The ranch was effectively cut in half. The empire my brother had just inherited was nothing but a collection of buildings and some dry dirt, separated from its life support by a piece of paper with my name on it. But a question gnawed at me, cold and sharp. How I racked my brain, trying to remember every document I had signed in the last 3 years. I remembered signing tax forms. I remembered signing liability waivers. I remembered signing the endless environmental reports. But I never signed a deed transfer. I never sat in front of a notary and accepted a gift of land. Property law does not work by magic. You have to accept the deed. You have to sign the transfer papers. I looked at the date on the deed again. October 15th. 3 years ago. That was 2 weeks before Elias had his second, massive stroke. The one that took his speech. The one that left him bedridden until he passed away last winter. He must have known. He must have seen the writing on the wall long before I did. He saw Troy's laziness. He saw my parents' greed. And he saw me, struggling to keep the ship afloat with duct tape and willpower. I stared at the phone screen, at the automated email that had arrived exactly 45 minutes after I was fired. I touched the screen, turning off the display. The reflection of my own eyes stared back at me from the black glass. They looked tired, but there was something else there too, a spark. I did not know exactly what legal gymnastics my grandfather had pulled off to get this land in my name without me knowing. I did not know why the county had waited 3 years to record it and send the notification. But as I put the truck back into gear and pulled onto the main highway, I realized something. My family thought they had just cut off a dead limb. They thought they had trimmed the fat. They had no idea that while they were busy polishing the brass on the Titanic, the captain had quietly given the lifeboat to the only person who knew how to row. I turned up the radio, the static cleared, and a heavy thumping bass line filled the cab. I had been kicked out of the family. I had been fired. I had been humiliated. But I was about to find out that being the hired help meant I was the only one who knew where the keys were kept, and I was holding the master key. I did not drive straight to the highway, even though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to put as many miles as possible between my truck and the house. I made a detour. I turned the steering wheel hard to the left and drove toward the commercial feed barn. It was a reflex. It was muscle memory. For 7 years, my routine had been absolute. Before I left the property for any reason, I checked the heifer pens. I checked the automatic waterers. I checked the hay levels. It did not matter that I had just been fired. My brain was still wired to care about the animals that my family saw as nothing more than inventory. I pulled up to the side entrance of the massive metal structure. The sun was beating down on the galvanized steel roof, creating a shimmering wave of heat. I hopped out of the truck, my boots kicking up dust, and walked to the employee keypad mounted next to the sliding door. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my keycard. It was a simple white plastic rectangle, worn smooth at the edges from thousands of uses. I held it up to the black sensor box. Usually, there would be a satisfying beep and the heavy mechanical clunk of the magnetic lock releasing. This time, there was a harsh, low-pitched buzz. I frowned. I wiped the card on my jeans, thinking maybe it was just dusty. I held it up again. Buzz. I looked at the small LCD screen above the keypad. A single line of red text was scrolling across it. Cold and digital. Access denied. I stood there, blinking. The heat radiated off the metal door, stinging my face. I tried a third time, jamming the card against the plastic reader until my knuckles turned white. Access denied. Card deactivated. They had not just fired me. They had erased me. I looked at my watch. It had been exactly 19 minutes since I walked out of that office. 19 minutes, in less time than it takes to watch a sitcom episode. My brother, or more likely, the expensive IT consultant my parents had hired last month, had gone into the security mainframe and revoked my clearance. I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, but it was not a happy sound. It was sharp and jagged. I had spent nights sleeping on a cot in this barn during calving season, covered in amniotic fluid and straw, keeping premature calves alive with a bottle, and now I was locked out like a thief. I walked back to the truck and slammed the door shut. The cab was stifling. I grabbed my phone again. If they had killed my physical access, I needed to know how deep the purge went. I opened the browser and navigated to the cloud-based grazing management system. This was software I had customized. I had built the algorithms that calculated the forage recovery rates. I had input 5 years of data by hand. I typed in my username, Morgan B. Eco. I typed in my password. The screen loaded for a second, spinning a little gray circle, and then refreshed. Error, user account deactivated by administrator. I stared at the screen. Below the error message, there was a small line of text identifying the system admin. Contact admin Troy CEO. He had changed his username, Troy CEO. I could picture him sitting in that air-conditioned office, giggling like a schoolboy as he clicked the delete button next to my name. He did not even know how to use the software. He probably thought the biomass density column was a typo, but he knew how to lock me out of the work I had built. My fingers were trembling with rage now. It was a hot, prickly heat that started at the back of my neck. I opened a new tab. I typed in https google.com/search QUS Callahan Ranch.com. The homepage loaded quickly on the 5G network. I scrolled down. Usually, the Our Story section featured a black and white photo of my great-grandfather, followed by a family portrait from 10 years ago where I was standing in the back, holding a prize-winning heifer. That photo was gone. In its place was a brand-new, high-resolution image. It was clearly taken recently. It showed my grandfather, Elias, sitting in his wheelchair on the porch, looking frail and distant. Next to him, kneeling on one knee with a hand on the old man's shoulder, was Troy. Troy was wearing a pristine white cowboy hat and a shirt that had clearly just been unfolded from the packaging. He was looking at Elias with a fake expression of deep reverence. The text beside the photo read, "Passing the torch, a legacy of leadership." Troy Callahan learned the art of ranching at his grandfather's knee from his earliest days. Troy has been the visionary force behind the ranch's modernization, carrying the wisdom of the past into a bright future. I felt sick, physically sick. Troy had spent his earliest days playing lacrosse at a private boarding school 3 hours away. He had visited the ranch on holidays. He had never learned a single thing at Elias's knee except how to mix a gin and tonic. But it got worse. A video popped up in the center of the screen. Autoplay. It was a promotional clip for the new Callahan experience. Upbeat, corporate country music started playing. The camera panned over the green lushness of the North Spring pasture. My pasture. Then Troy appeared on screen. He was walking through the tall grass, spreading his arms wide. "We are revolutionizing the way we treat the land," Troy said to the camera, his voice smooth and practiced. "I have developed a proprietary rotational system called the Callahan Loop. It maximizes efficiency and profit, proving that you can double your herd size without hurting the earth." The video cut to a graphic. It was my chart. It was the exact color-coded map I had drawn up on my iPad 3 months ago, but it had been altered. The original chart had bright red zones marked critical recovery, do not graze. Those were the areas where the soil was too fragile, where the roots were barely holding on. In Troy's version, the red zones were gone, the whole map was green. He had taken my science, erased the warnings, and was using it to sell a lie to investors. He was claiming he could double the herd size on land that was already gasping for air. I was not just fired, I was being plagiarized. My life's work was being skinned and worn as a costume by the person who had mocked me for doing it. My phone pinged. A text message. I looked at the top of the screen. It was from Dad. I opened it. "Morgan, we are in a transition period. We are professionalizing the operation across the board. It is best if you focus on your personal life now. You have been too stressed lately. From next week, please do not come by the barns or the office unless you have a specific appointment. We will mail you any personal items you left in your locker." Professionalizing. That was the word they used when they wanted to make cruelty sound like business. Professionalizing meant stripping away the family member who asked difficult questions about water usage. Professionalizing meant erasing the witness. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. It bounced against the worn upholstery. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive this truck right through the front doors of the barn and watch Troy scramble out of the way. I wanted to burn it all down. But then, my eyes landed on the phone again. The screen had gone dark, but I remembered the email. Mesa County Recorder's Office. I took a deep breath. I picked up the phone. My hands were shaking, but my voice needed to be steady. I dialed the number listed at the bottom of the PDF. It rang 3 times. Mesa County Clerk and Recorder. "This is Janice," a bored voice answered. "Hi, Janice?" I said. I tried to sound casual. "My name is Morgan Brooks. I just received an automated email notification about a recorded deed, a warranty deed for the North Spring parcel." I heard the clicking of a keyboard on the other end. "Brooks." Janice mumbled. "Ah, yes. Morgan E. Brooks. Looks like the notification system finally caught up with the digitization project. We are moving all the physical records from the last 5 years into the cloud. The system automatically emails the owner of record when the file is indexed. Sorry if it spooked you." It did not spook me. I said, I wanted to clarify something. The date on the deed says 3 years ago. That is correct. Janice said, "Recorded October 15th, 2021. Grantor was Elias Callahan. Grantee is you." "Okay," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "And just to be absolutely clear, who owns that land? Is it Callahan Ranch, LLC? Or is it no, hun," Janice interrupted, sounding like she was chewing gum. "It is not the LLC. The LLC is listed on the adjacent parcels. This specific parcel ID ending in 440 is fee simple absolute. Sole owner is Morgan E. Brooks. It is personal property. I closed my eyes, and I hesitated. Does the ranch have any recorded easements? Like, do they have a permanent right to use the road or the water? I heard more typing. Let me check the encumbrances. Janice said. Nope. No permanent easements. There is a note here about a temporary license agreement referenced in the file. But that is a private contract, not a deed restriction. As far as the county is concerned, that is your dirt. If you want to put up a gate and lock it, that is your business. Thank you. Janice, I whispered. I hung up. I sat there in the silence of the truck cab. Outside, a hawk screeched, circling high above the feed barn. I looked out the windshield at the massive operation in front of me. The feed trucks, the tractors, the miles of fencing. It looked impressive. It looked like an empire. But Janice had just confirmed what my gut already knew. They were squatters. My brother, my parents, the bank, the investors, they were all operating on the assumption that the North Spring parcel was just another piece of the Callahan pie. They thought it was theirs because it had always been theirs, but it was not. I started the engine. The old Ford rumbled to life, a low growl that vibrated through the seat. I looked at the access-denied red light still blinking on the barn door. They thought they had locked me out. They thought they had cut off my access to the food, the data, the legacy. I put the truck in reverse and backed away, turning the wheel toward the county road. If you are listening to this, and you live in a city, you might think 580 acres is just a lot of empty space. You might think dirt is just dirt. But if you have ever lived in a high desert valley, where the rain stops in May and does not come back until October, you know better. You know that land without water is just a cemetery waiting for occupants. My family had the cows, they had the brand, they had the shiny new website and the arrogance of kings. But I had the North Spring, and as I drove away, leaving a cloud of dust settling on Troy's shiny new empire, I realized something that made a cold smile spread across my face. You can survive a lot of things in this business. You can survive low beef prices. You can survive a bad winter. You can even survive a recession. But nobody survives a drought that targets them specifically. I was not just the owner of the land. I was the owner of the only faucet in the valley. And my hand was hovering right over the valve. 3 days after I drove away from the ranch, my phone rang. I was sitting in a cheap motel room on the edge of town, surrounded by cardboard boxes that contained the entirety of my life, my boots, my books on soil science, and a few framed photos I had managed to grab from the cabin before my keycard was deactivated. The caller ID said, Briggs Alder. My stomach tightened. Briggs Alder had been the legal counsel for Callahan Ranch since before I was born. They handled everything from grazing leases to liability lawsuits when tourists fell off horses. I assumed this was it. I assumed Troy had hired them to serve me with a cease and desist order, or maybe to threaten me about the truck I was still driving, even though it was titled in my name. I answered, bracing myself for a fight. Hello, Morgan. It was Mr. Briggs himself. His voice sounded like gravel rolling inside a cement mixer, rough, old, and undeniably authoritative. I need you to come to my office. Today. I looked around the motel room. I am not really in the mood to sign any liability waivers. Arthur, I said, if Troy wants his truck back, tell him to come get it himself. This is not about Troy, Briggs said, his tone dropping lower. And Troy does not know I am calling you. Do not tell him. Do not tell your parents. Come to the back entrance on 4th Street, the one by the alley. Come alone. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. Arthur Briggs was 80 years old. He was a man who wore 3-piece suits in July and still used a fountain pen. He did not do back alley meetings. He did not do secrets. Unless, of course, the secret was big enough to shatter the glass walls my family was trying to build. I drove to town. The law office of Briggs Alder was a brick fortress downtown, smelling of old paper, mahogany, and the kind of silence that costs $400 an hour. I parked in the alley as instructed and knocked on the heavy steel door. Briggs opened it himself. He looked older than I remembered. His skin was papery, but his eyes were sharp. He ushered me in, bypassing the reception area where the secretaries would have seen me, and led me straight into his private library. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to a leather wingback chair. He walked behind his massive desk and unlocked a drawer with a small brass key. He pulled out a thick, padded yellow envelope. It was sealed with wax, actual red wax. He placed it in front of me. "Your grandfather, Elias, gave this to me 6 months before he passed," Briggs said. "He gave me very specific instructions. He said this envelope was to remain in my safe, unopened, until a specific condition was met." "What condition?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Briggs looked at me over the top of his spectacles. "The condition was that you, Morgan Brooks, had to be removed from the operational management of Callahan Ranch." He was very specific about the wording. He said, "When they push her out, you give her the weapon." The weapon. I looked down at the envelope. On the front, in shaky, spidery handwriting that made my heart ache, was my name, Morgan. "Go ahead," Briggs said softly. I broke the wax seal. My hands were trembling so hard, I almost tore the paper. Inside, there was a letter written on legal pad paper, and a stapled document that looked like a contract. I picked up the letter first. "My dearest Morgan, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have come true. It means I am gone, and the sharks have finally circled. It means your brother and your parents have decided that profit is more important than the dirt under their feet, and they have decided you are in the way. I am sorry I could not fix this while I was alive. I was too tired, and frankly, I was outnumbered. I knew Troy wanted the title. I knew your mother wanted the status, and I knew that if I tried to fight them openly, they would have tied me up in court until the ranch was bankrupt. So, I let them have the name. I let them have the LLC. But a ranch is not a logo. Morgan, you and I know that. A ranch is an ecosystem. It is a living thing, and a living thing needs blood to survive. In this valley, water is blood, and access is the veins. I knew they would underestimate you. They see you as the help. They see you as the girl who likes to play in the mud. They do not understand that without you. The grass dies. So, I made sure that if they ever decided they did not need you, they would find out exactly how much they actually do. The North Spring parcel is yours. I deeded it to you years ago, but owning the land is just the first step. The document attached to this letter is the second step. It is the leverage. Do not let them bully you. Do not let them guilt you. You hold the keys now. You decide if the gate stays open. Love, Grandpa. I wiped a tear from my cheek. I could hear his voice in every word. He had played the long game. He had sat in his wheelchair, unable to speak, watching Troy preen and pose, knowing all the while that he had planted a landmine beneath the throne. I picked up the stapled document. It was titled, Revocable License Agreement for Water Use and Right-of-Way Access. I looked at Briggs. "What is this?" "This," Briggs said, leaning forward, "is a masterpiece of property law." He began to explain, and as he spoke, the legal jargon transformed into a terrifyingly simple picture of reality. Most ranches operate on easements. An easement is a permanent right. If a neighbor has an easement to drive across your land, that right belongs to the land, not the person. It lasts forever. It transfers when the land is sold. But this was not an easement. This was a license. A license is permission. It is personal. It is temporary. It is like letting a friend crash on your couch. You can let them stay, but you can also tell them to leave. Grandpa Elias had granted Callahan Ranch LLC a license to use the water from the North Spring and to drive cattle across the access road on the North Spring parcel. But there was a clause. Clause 4. Briggs tapped the paper with his pen. "Read that part." I read it out loud. "The term of this license shall remain in effect indefinitely, provided that Morgan E. Brooks is employed by the licensee Callahan Ranch LLC in a full-time managerial capacity with oversight of environmental sustainability. In the event that Morgan E. Brooks voluntarily resigns, is terminated for any reason, or is removed from her operational role, This license shall automatically expire 60 days from the date of such termination or removal. I stopped reading. The silence in the room was deafening. 60 days, Briggs repeated. The clock started ticking the minute your father told you to leave the office 3 days ago. He stood up and walked to a large map on the wall. It was a detailed survey of the entire valley. He traced the outline of the North Spring parcel, my 580 acres. Look at the infrastructure. Morgan. He pointed to a series of blue dots. These are the primary solar pumps for the Mid-Valley troughs, he said. They are physically located on your land. He pointed to a thick blue line. This is the main pipeline that gravity feeds the lower pastures. It originates at your spring. He pointed to the winding gray line of the road, and this is the only road wide enough to move a cattle hauler from the winter grounds to the summer grounds. He turned back to me. Elias did not just give you a random square of dirt. He gerrymandered the property lines. He specifically drew the boundaries of the North Spring parcel to capture every single critical piece of infrastructure the ranch needs to function. He cut the heart out of the ranch and put it in a box with your name on it. I sat back, my mind reeling. Without this license, I started. Without this license, Briggs finished. Callahan Ranch LLC is trespassing every time a cow takes a drink of water. They are trespassing every time a truck drives up that road. And legally, you have the right to cap the wells and put up a gate. But why wait? I asked. Why did the deed only show up in my email now? Why did not I know about this 3 years ago? Briggs smiled. A thin, dry smile. Because Elias knew you. Morgan. He knew that if you knew you owned the land, you would have tried to save them earlier. You would have used it to force them to listen to your sustainability plans. You would have tried to fix the family. He paused. He wanted to protect you from your own kindness. He wanted to make sure that you only got this power after they showed their true colors. He instructed me to file the recording of the deed only after I received confirmation that you had been removed. When you called me last week to ask about your severance, which your father had CC'd me on, that was the trigger. I sent the deed to the county recorder immediately. I looked at the document in my hands. It wasn't just paper. It was a shield. For 7 years, I had been the one begging them to listen. I had been the one pleading for money to fix pipes, pleading for them to respect the carrying capacity of the soil. I had been the powerless little sister. And now I was the landlord. Briggs sat back down. So, here is the situation, he said. You have 57 days left on the clock. On day 60, if there is no new agreement signed between you and Callahan Ranch LLC, their rights to the water and the road vanish. They become legal strangers to the resources that keep their herd alive. He looked me dead in the eye. They do not know this exists. They think the water rights are attached to the LLC. They think the road is public. Elias kept the original survey locked away, and since they never bothered to read the county filings, they are operating blind. He pushed the contract toward me. You have a choice. Morgan, you can walk away. You can sell the land to a developer or a neighbor and take the cash, or you can enforce this license. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the page. Elias Callahan. I thought about Troy's video. I thought about the fake map. I thought about my mother telling me I was too sensitive. I thought about the cattle. 2,000 head of cattle that would be thirsty in a month. If I enforced this, it wouldn't just hurt Troy's pride. It would cripple the business. It would stop the cash flow. It could destroy the ranch entirely if they didn't capitulate. But if I didn't enforce it, if I let them keep using the water without consequence, they would drain the aquifer dry in 5 years. They would overgraze the land until it was a dust bowl. Just like Elias feared. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about stewardship. Elias had given me the power to save the land, but to do it, I might have to destroy the business my family was clinging to. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. I looked at Briggs. Do not tell them, I said. Briggs raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Do not tell them about the license expiration, I said, my voice steadying. Not yet. Let them have their victory lap. Let Troy play CEO for a few more weeks. Let them commit to their new luxury plan. Let them spend the money. Briggs's eyes twinkled. You want them to overextend. I want them to understand the value of what they threw away. I said, I want them to feel the drought. I stood up and shook his hand. His grip was firm. I will handle the notifications when the time is right. I said, until then, let them think I am just the unemployed sister living in a motel. I walked out of the office and into the alleyway. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the brick walls. I felt heavy, but it was a good weight. It was the weight of a sledgehammer resting on my shoulder. I got into my truck and drove toward the edge of town, where the paved road turned into the dirt track that led up to the North Spring. I needed to see it. I needed to stand on my land. When I got there, twilight had settled over the valley. The air was cooling down. I walked over to the main valve of the big bore well, a massive industrial wheel of rusted iron sticking out of the ground. It was silent up here, peaceful. I put my hand on the cold metal of the valve. Below me, miles away, the lights of the main ranch house were twinkling. They were probably having dinner. Troy was probably toasting to his brilliance. They were partying in a house built on sand, completely unaware that I was standing on the rock. I looked into the lens of the imaginary camera that follows us through the movie of our lives, and I asked the question that was pounding in my chest. If you were me, if you held the literal valve that controlled the lifeblood of the people who betrayed you, would you turn it? Would you shut it off to teach them a lesson, even if it meant risking the only home you ever knew? Or would you leave it open and let them drain you dry one last time? My hand tightened on the iron wheel. The rust flaked off against my palm. I did not turn it. Not yet. But knowing I could, that changed everything. The morning after I stood on the ridge and realized I held the kill switch for Callahan Ranch, I did not go back to the motel to celebrate. I did not buy a bottle of champagne. Instead, I drove 3 towns over to a mid-sized city that smelled of asphalt and ambition, and I walked into the offices of Frontier Land and Water Legal. I was done with family friends. I was done with attorneys who had played golf with my father for 20 years. Briggs had given me the weapon, but I needed a soldier who knew how to fire it without blowing my own hand off. I found Naomi Delgado. Naomi was a legend in the tri-state area. Though not the kind of legend my parents liked, she was the lawyer who had sued the State Department of Transportation over a wetland dispute and won. She was the one who represented small organic farmers when big pesticide companies tried to bully them. She was sharp, terrifyingly organized, and she had a reputation for dissecting agricultural fraud, like a high school biology frog. Her office was nothing like the mahogany and leather cave of Briggs and Alder. It was all glass, steel, and satellite maps. One entire wall was a whiteboard covered in complex hydrological schematics. I sat across from her, laying out the deed to the North Spring parcel and the license agreement Briggs had given me. Naomi read them in silence. She pushed her glasses up her nose, her eyes scanning the fine print with the precision of a laser scanner. After 10 minutes, she looked up. "This is a nuclear option." "Morgan," she said, her voice crisp, "you realize that, right? If we enforce this license expiration, the ranch is dead in 60 days. Less. If the bank gets wind of it, I know." I said, "I am not sure if I want to kill it. I just want leverage. I want them to stop destroying the soil." Naomi leaned back, tapping a pen against her chin. "Leverage is good," she said. "But before we fire a warning shot, we need to know what kind of ammunition they have. You said you handled all the environmental compliance for 7 years. Yes. And you said they fired you because they wanted to professionalize." Naomi frowned. She turned her computer monitor toward me. "I have seen this pattern before," she said darkly. "When a struggling ranch suddenly wants to get rid of the only person who actually understands the regulations, it is usually because that person is about to notice something that does not add up. We are going to do an audit. Right now, for the next 6 hours, we did not leave that office." Naomi pulled up public records, bank filings, and the environmental impact statements that Callahan Ranch had filed with the State Agricultural Board over the last 5 years. It started as a boring exercise in data entry. We were comparing columns of numbers, checking dates, cross-referencing rainfall totals with reported yield. But then, the pattern emerged. It started with the herd counts. I sat there, Staring at a spreadsheet from 2 years ago, I remembered that year vividly. We had a severe dry spell in July. I had argued with my father until I was blue in the face that we needed to sell off 200 head of cattle to preserve the forage. He had agreed, grudgingly. I remembered watching the cattle trucks pull away. I remembered logging the reduction in my internal reports. But on the screen in Naomi's office, the official inventory report submitted to the bank for that same quarter showed something completely different. "Wait," I said, pointing at the screen. "That number is wrong." "What is it?" Naomi asked. "It says here the herd size remained stable at 1,800 head. I said, "But we sold 200, and look at the next quarter. It says we increased to 2,000. I did the math in my head. "Naomi," I said, my voice dropping, "if they actually had 2,000 cows on that land during the drought of 23, the grass would have been gone in 3 weeks. They would have been feeding hay in August." "We did not buy hay until November," Naomi typed furiously. "So either they starved the cows, or they lied about the number of cows to get a bigger operating line of credit." I finished. We kept digging. It got worse. In the last 3 years, the reported herd size had inflated by 35 to 40%. According to the paperwork my brother and father had submitted to the lenders, Callahan Ranch was a miracle of nature. It was producing record amounts of beef on land that had not seen a significant increase in rainfall in a decade. But biology does not work like that. You cannot put 40% more weight on a fragile ecosystem without breaking it. Unless, of course, you only break it in reality, while keeping it pristine on paper. That is where the soil samples came in. I had personally collected soil cores every spring. I knew the nitrate levels. I knew the compaction rates. I had built a database of the slow, steady decline of the ranch's health. Naomi pulled up the PDF of the Comprehensive Soil Health Assessment, submitted 6 months ago. It looked like my report. It had my formatting. It had my graphs. But the data points were different. "Look at the metadata," Naomi said. Opening a side panel on the software, she pointed to the revision history. Author Morgan Brooks. Last modified by Troy Callahan. Software Adobe Acrobat Pro. Date March 12th. 3 a.m. "He did not even redo the tests," Naomi said, her tone disgusted. "He just opened your PDF, erased the real numbers, and typed in better ones. Look here. He changed the soil moisture retention rate from 12% to 22%. He optimized it," I whispered. "He literally photoshopped the dirt. But the final blow, the one that made the room stop spinning and settle into a cold, hard clarity, came when we opened the water stability report. This was the big one. This was the document required by the state water engineer to prove that our pumping from the North Spring Aquifer was not impacting the neighboring wells. It was a serious federal document. Lying on this form was a felony. I scrolled to the bottom of the page. There, above the line labeled Certified Hydrologist, Environmental Manager, was a signature, Morgan E. Brooks. I stared at it. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. "That is not my signature," I said. Naomi looked at me. "Are you sure it looks close?" "I am positive," I said. My hand was shaking, but my voice was ice cold. I pointed to the loops on the capital M. I pointed to the way the B in Brooks curled inward at the bottom. "I write with a sharp, jagged hand," I said. "I press hard. My letters are narrow. This is round. It is flowery. It has a calligraphy slant to it." I felt a lump form in my throat. Not of sadness, but of pure bile. "That is my mother's handwriting," I said. The room went silent. The hum of the computer server seemed to get louder. My mother, the woman who told me I was too sensitive, the woman who said I lacked vision. She had sat at her desk, probably sipping her morning coffee, and she had forged my name on a federal document that hid the fact that they were draining the aquifer dry. "They did not just steal your land, Morgan," Naomi said softly. "They stole your professional identity. They used your credentials, your degree, and your good name as a shield." She turned to face me, her expression grim. "Do you understand what this means? If the bank audits the ranch, which they will, eventually, and they find out the cows are missing or the water is gone, they are not going to look at Troy. Troy is the CEO. Sure. But the environmental fraud. That is on the person who signed the reports. That is on you. I felt the blood drain from my face. They set me up. I said, Naomi nodded. They probably convinced themselves they were just borrowing your credibility. But legally, you are the fall guy. If the EPA walks onto that ranch tomorrow and sees the damage, you are the one facing fines, maybe even prison time for bank fraud. I sat back in the chair. For a moment, I tried to find that old feeling of familial loyalty. I tried to find the little girl who wanted her daddy to be proud of her, but she was gone. She had been replaced by a forensic pathologist looking at a corpse. I realized then that my family was not just a group of flawed people making bad decisions. They were a tumor. They were a malignant growth that had wrapped itself around the land and around my life, feeding off my work and my reputation to sustain their own vanity. And like a tumor, you cannot negotiate with it. You cannot love it into being healthy. You have to cut it out. I looked at Naomi. The sadness was gone. The shock was gone. All that was left was a clinical, cold determination. What do we do? I asked. Naomi smiled, and it was the sharpest, most dangerous thing I had ever seen. We do not just cancel the license, she said. That is too easy. If we just pull the water rights, they will sue you, claim you are acting out of spite, and drag it out in court for years while they keep pumping. She tapped the stack of forged reports. We need to make sure that when we pull the trigger, the bank and the government are pointing their guns at Troy. Not you. She opened a new file on her computer. We are going to prepare a dossier, she said. We are going to document every single forgery. We are going to prove, with timestamps and metadata, that you were locked out of the system when these edits were made. We are going to build a firewall around you so thick that when the explosion happens, the blast only goes one way. She looked at me, and then, we use the North Spring parcel. We do not just tell them the water is cut off. We tell the bank. We tell the state. We show them that the collateral for those fraudulent loans, the water and the access, does not belong to the Callahan family. It belongs to the victim of their fraud. I nodded. Do it, I said. Naomi started typing. I looked out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, 60 miles away, my mother was probably forging my signature on another check, and my brother was probably filming another video about his genius management style. They thought I was crying in a motel room. They thought I was broken. They had no idea that I was sitting in a glass room, sharpening the scalpel. I did not scream. I did not drive to the main house and throw rocks through the windows. I sat in Naomi's glass-walled office, watched the cursor blink on the computer screen, and did the most damaging thing a person can do in a business dispute. I followed the contract to the letter. We drafted the notice together. It was not a long document. It was a single page, written in dry, unemotional legal language. It referenced the revocable license agreement signed by Elias Callahan and Callahan Ranch, LLC. It referenced Clause 4A, Notice of License Expiration. The subject line read, the body of the email stated simply that, pursuant to the removal of Morgan E. Brooks from her operational role, the license granting Callahan Ranch access to the North Spring water source and the connector road would expire in exactly 60 days. If the LLC wished to continue using these resources, they would need to negotiate a new commercial lease agreement with the landowner me under current market rates and strict sustainability conditions. I hit send. Then, I waited. It took Troy exactly 45 minutes to respond. I could almost see him sitting in our father's leather chair, rolling his eyes as he typed on his phone. He did not call his lawyer. He did not call the county recorder to verify the claim. He just reacted with the reflexive arrogance of a man who has never been told no. Morgan. His email read, "Stop being dramatic. This is getting pathetic. Dad is already stressed enough without you throwing a temper tantrum with fake legal threats. We are not turning the ranch into your personal environmental classroom. Grow up and move on." He thought it was a bluff. He thought it was a cry for attention from a sister who missed feeling important. I read his email and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sting. It was like watching a man walk off a cliff because he refused to believe gravity applied to him. I looked at Naomi. She was smirking. Phase 2, she asked. Phase 2. I said. I opened the original email, the one with the official legal notice attached, and I forwarded it. But this time, I added 2 new recipients to the carbon copy line. The first was the senior loan officer at Western Highland Bank, the institution that held the $20 million mortgage on the ranch's infrastructure. The second was the managing partner of the private equity firm that had just pumped $2 million into Troy's luxury tourism expansion. I did not write a message to them. I just let the attachment speak for itself. Here's the notice. Here's the expiration date. By the way, the water you think you are financing, you might want to check who owns it. Then, I went to work on the ground. While Troy was fighting a war of words, the land was fighting a war for survival, and it was losing. The drought arrived 2 weeks early. It came in like a fever. The wind shifted to the southwest, blowing hot and dry like a hairdryer held against your skin. The humidity dropped to single digits. The sky turned a bleached, hazy white. On social media, however, Callahan Ranch was a paradise. I sat in my truck, parked on the public road just outside the fence line, and watched Troy's latest Instagram reel. It was a drone shot, sweeping over emerald green pastures, with sparkling blue water in the reservoirs. The caption read, "The Callahan Experience, where nature meets luxury. Book your summer escape now." The footage was at least 2 years old. I recognized the placement of the hay bales in the background. Those bales had been fed out winters ago. I lowered the phone and looked at the reality in front of me. The grass on the lower pastures. Troy's pastures was not emerald green. It was the color of old cardboard. The dust was rising in choking clouds every time a cow took a step. The luxury he was selling was a mirage. I started my truck and drove up the back way to the North Spring parcel. I had hired an independent hydrologist, a man named Dr. Evans, to meet me there. We needed official documentation. When we got to the North Spring, the silence was heavy. Usually, you can hear the birds, the wind in the cottonwoods, the lowing of cattle, but the heat had silenced everything. Dr. Evans unspooled his measuring tape, dropping the weighted sensor down into the monitoring well next to the spring. We waited. The tape went down, and down, and down. Finally, we heard the splash. He pulled it up and looked at the wet mark against the numbers. He shook his head. "It has dropped 4 feet in 3 weeks. Morgan, I wrote the number down in my logbook. 4 feet. That was not natural evaporation. That was aggressive, reckless pumping. They are running the boosters 24/7, I said, looking down the hill toward the ranch. They are trying to keep the lower meadows green for the tourists. They are sucking the life out of this hill to paint the lawn downstairs." We moved to the main watering trough fed by the spring. It was a massive concrete tank that served as the primary drinking spot for the upper herd. The water level was low. The float valve was hissing, trying to refill it, but the pressure was weak. Around the base of the trough, the ground had turned into a churned-up nightmare of drying mud. I knelt down and scooped up a handful of the sludge. It smelled of sulfur and decay. This was the bottom of the barrel. Dr. Evans took photos. He took photos of the exposed roots of the cottonwoods, showing how the water table had retreated away from them. He took photos of the cracked earth that looked like shattered pottery. "This is actionable," he told me. "This is not just use. This is waste. Under state law, you could shut them down for this alone, even without the license expiration." I stood up and wiped the mud from my hands. "No," I said. "Not yet." Why? Evans asked. "You have the evidence." "Because if I shut the valve now, Troy will blame the failure of the ranch on me," I said. "He will tell the investors that his sister sabotaged him. He will say the business plan was perfect, but I was vindictive." I looked down at the distant rooftops of the ranch compound. I need the 60 days to run out. I need the bank to see that he had 2 months to fix this, 2 months to negotiate, to plan, to find an alternative water source. And he did nothing but post videos on Instagram. I need his negligence to be the cause of death, not my hand on the valve. The weeks dragged on. The heat did not break. My phone started blowing up with texts from the ranch hands, men and women I had worked alongside for a decade. They were loyal to the paycheck, but they knew the land. Main well in the south pasture is spitting sand. One text read, "Boss told us to double the pumping rate on the north line." Another said, "We told him the pressure is dropping. He said do it anyway." Then, the inevitable happened. The shallow wells in the lower valley, the ones on Troy's land, went dry. It started on a Tuesday. I was up on the ridge with my binoculars. I saw the movement before I heard it. A massive, dark shape moving slowly up the access road. The cattle. Cows are not smart, generally speaking, but they have a primal intelligence when it comes to thirst. They knew the water down below was gone. They could smell the north spring from miles away. They were breaking through the cross-fencing, pushing their way up the narrow road that cut through my land. Hundreds of them. Their ribs were showing. Their coats were dusty. They were desperate. They crowded around the North Spring trough, pushing and shoving. The sound of their bawling echoed off the canyon walls. It was a sound of distress that makes any rancher's blood run cold. I watched them drink. I watched them draining the water faster than the strained aquifer could replace it. I could have gone down there and locked the gate. I could have put up a fence and said, "This is my water," but I did not. I let them drink. I was not going to punish the animals for the sins of the owner, but I documented it. I took video of the overcrowding. I took video of the dry wells down below. I was building a timeline of a disaster that was entirely man-made. Then, 5 days before the deadline, the phone call finally happened. I was not the one who received it. Troy was, but I heard about it later from the ranch secretary, who had quit that same afternoon because she could not handle the screaming. Apparently, the senior loan officer from Western Highland Bank had finally opened my email, or maybe their risk assessment algorithms had finally flagged the license expiration notice I had CC'd them on. The banker had called Troy at 10 in the morning. He did not ask about the tourism projection. He did not ask about the new logo. He asked a simple question. "Mr. Callahan, we have a document here stating that the primary water source for your collateral, the cattle and the land, is subject to a license agreement that expires in 96 hours. Can you please forward us the renewed contract or the deed proving you have secured alternative water rights?" Troy had apparently laughed at first. He told the banker it was a family dispute, a misunderstanding. The banker did not laugh. He told Troy that unless proof of water security was provided by end of business Friday, the bank would consider the loan in default due to material impairment of collateral. That was the moment the reality finally pierced the bubble of Troy's ego. It was not a family dispute anymore. It was a $20 million liability. I was sitting on the tailgate of my truck that evening, watching the sunset bleed red across the sky. The dust in the air turned the light into a bruised purple color. My phone rang. It was Troy. I looked at the name on the screen. It was the first time he had called me since the day he kicked me out of the office. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. He called again immediately. I let it ring again. I wanted him to feel it. I wanted him to feel that frantic, clawing sensation of reaching for a lifeline and grasping nothing but air. That was how I had felt for 7 years while begging them to listen to the science. I looked down into the valley. The shadows were lengthening over the North Spring. The cattle were settling down for the night, chewing their cud. Clustered around the only water left in the county, they were on my land. They were drinking my water, and in 4 days, the legal right for them to be there would evaporate just like the moisture in the soil. My brother had wanted an empire. He wanted to be the king of Callahan Ranch. Well, he was the king now, but he was realizing that a king without water is just a man standing in a desert wearing a fancy hat. I took a sip of lukewarm water from my canteen. It tasted like metal and dust. I looked at the text message notification on my phone. Troy had left a voicemail. I did not listen to it. Not yet. Instead, I looked at the date on my watch. 56 days down. 4 to go. They had spent decades taking from this land without asking. They had spent a lifetime taking from me without thanking. The free ride was over, and the thirst was just beginning. The black SUV looked ridiculous parked in front of my cabin. It was a $90,000 vehicle, polished to a mirror shine, sitting on a patch of dirt that was cracking from dryness. It looked like a spaceship that had landed on a dying planet. I stood on the porch, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. I had been expecting this. The deadline was 48 hours away. The bank was breathing down their necks. The cattle were crowding my fence line, desperate for the water that only I controlled. The driver's side door opened, and my father stepped out. He looked older than he had a month ago. His shoulders, usually squared back with the confidence of a man who owned everything he saw, were slumped. He adjusted his hat, but the motion lacked his usual swagger. Then the passenger door opened. My mother stepped out. She was not wearing her usual ranch executive attire, the crisp blazers and turquoise jewelry she wore to board meetings. She was wearing a soft, knitted cardigan, one I remembered from my childhood. She was holding a thick manila folder against her chest like a shield. There was no Troy. Of course there was no Troy. Troy was the golden boy. You do not send the golden boy to beg. You send the parents to do the dirty work while the prince waits in the castle. I did not go down the steps to greet them. I leaned against the doorframe and waited. "Morgan," my mother called out. Her voice wavered. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times, but never directed at me. Usually, she used this tone on zoning commissioners or unhappy neighbors. It was the "I am just a harmless mother trying to hold it together" tone. She hurried up the steps, her eyes already brimming with tears. Before I could say a word, she threw her arms around me. She smelled of expensive perfume and fear. "My baby girl." She sobbed into my shoulder. "Look at you. Living in this shack. We have been so worried about you." I stood stiffly. I did not hug her back. My arms hung at my sides like dead weights. "We have missed you so much," she said, pulling back to look at my face. She reached up and touched my cheek with a trembling hand. "Why didn't you call?" "We have been waiting by the phone every night." I looked at my father, who had followed her up the steps. He was avoiding my eyes. He was looking at the peeling paint on the porch railing. "You fired me," I said. My voice was flat. I did not want to give them any emotional surface area to grab onto. "You cut off my access. You locked me out." My mother let out a wet, incredulous laugh, wiping her eyes. "Oh, Morgan, honey. That was just tough love. It was a test." "A test," I repeated. "Yes," my father chimed in, finally looking at me. His voice was deep, trying to find that old authority. "We wanted to see if you could stand on your own 2 feet. We wanted to push you out of the nest so you could fly. We knew you had it in you to be independent, but you were getting too comfortable in the background. It was never permanent. We just wanted you to find your fire." I stared at them. I want you to pause and appreciate the sheer, breathtaking audacity of that lie. They had deactivated my keycard. They had erased my biography from the website. They had stolen my work. And now, because they needed something from me, they were rewriting history to make their cruelty look like a parenting strategy. "And look," my mother said, gesturing to the dry hills around us. "You passed. You did it. You found your fire. You have this land. You really showed us." She tried to smile, but her eyes were darting nervously to the folder in her arms. "Can we come in?" my father asked. "It is hot out here, and we have family business to discuss." I stepped aside, not because I wanted them in my space, but because I wanted to see exactly what was in that folder. They sat at my small, wobbly kitchen table. My mother looked around the cabin with thinly veiled disgust. It was a one-room structure I used for fieldwork. It had a cot, a stove, and a table. It was not the sprawling ranch house with the granite countertops she was used to. My father cleared his throat. "Times are hard. Morgan," he began. He clasped his hands on the table. "The economy is turning. The bank well. You know how bankers are. They are vultures. They smell a little blood and they start circling. Western Highland is giving us a hard time about some paperwork. Just bureaucratic nonsense, really. but they are threatening to freeze our operating lines." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "We need to stick together," he said. "The Callahans have always survived because we present a united front. When the world comes for us, we circle the wagons. We cannot let outsiders like the bank tear this family apart." I said nothing. I just watched him spin the web. He was creating a common enemy, the bank hoping I would forget that the real enemy was sitting across from me. "So," my mother said, sliding the folder onto the table, "we have a proposal. A generous one. We want you back. Morgan, we want you to come home." She opened the folder. "We are going to make you an honorary co-owner," she said, her voice bright and breathless. "We will put your name back on the website, right next to Troy's." And she paused for dramatic effect. "We are prepared to give you 5% equity in the operating company." 5%. Morgan, that is a significant stake. 5% of a company that is $20 million in debt. I thought, 5% of a sinking ship. And in exchange I asked. My father waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, just formalities. We need to clear up this confusion about the water license. We need to sign a new agreement that reinstates the ranch's perpetual access to the North Spring. Free of charge, of course, since you are family and now a part owner." And I asked, I knew there was more. My mother bit her lip. She pulled a stack of documents from the bottom of the folder. "And we need you to sign these," she said softly. "The bank, they are being very sticky about the environmental reports from the last few years. They want verification on the herd counts and the water usage data. Since you were the environmental manager, they need your signature to certify that everything was compliant." I looked at the papers. They were not new reports. They were the old reports, the ones Troy had altered, the ones with the fake data. They had printed out the fraudulent versions, the ones claiming we had more water than we did, the ones claiming the soil was healthy, and they had put a fresh signature line at the bottom. "I, Morgan E. Brooks, certify that the data contained herein is accurate and reflects the true historical conditions of the property." They wanted me to backdate my consent. They were asking me to look at a crime scene and sign a confession saying I was the one who pulled the trigger. If I signed these, Troy was in the clear. If the fraud was discovered later, it would be my signature on the page. I would be the one going to jail for bank fraud, while they kept their legacy intact. I looked up at them. My stomach churned, but my face remained stone. "You want me to validate the fake numbers Troy invented?" I asked. My father's face hardened. "They are not fake, Morgan. They are projections, adjusted for market optimism. Everyone does it. It is just business. It is fraud." I said, "And you want me to take the fall for it?" My mother reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Morgan, please," she whispered. "Do not use words like that. Think about who we are. Think about this family." She squeezed my hand. "Do you remember when you were 10 years old? You fell off that mare, the gray one. You broke your arm. Do you remember who picked you up? Do you remember who drove you to the hospital at 90 miles an hour? Singing songs to keep you from crying?" I pulled my hand away. "Dad," I said. "Yes," she said, tears spilling over again. "Your father, he would have done anything for you. And do you remember Christmas of '98? The power went out, and we all sat by the fire, and you and Troy sang carols until you fell asleep in my lap. We were so happy. Morgan, we were a team. She was weaponizing my childhood. She was taking the few tender moments of my life and turning them into currency. She was saying, 'We fed you, we clothed you, we loved you once, so now you owe us your integrity.'" I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound in the small room. I walked over to my own bag, sitting on the counter. I pulled out a document Naomi and I had drafted yesterday. It was thin, crisp, and stapled in the corner. I walked back to the table and dropped it on top of their generous offer. "This is my counteroffer," I said. My father looked at it, confused. "What is this that is a commercial lease agreement?" I said. "If Callahan Ranch wants water from the North Spring, you will pay for it. The rate is 4 cents per gallon, metered daily. You will also pay a monthly access fee for the use of the road. I pointed to the second page, and there is no retroactive signature. I will not sign your fraudulent reports. I will not cover for Troy. In fact, this contract stipulates that I will be hiring an independent auditor to monitor the water usage moving forward. If you violate the sustainability limits, I shut the valve. My parents stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. Do you want to charge us? My father sputtered. For water, Morgan. We are family. You do not charge your family for water. I looked him dead in the eye. You fired family. I said, you erased family from the website. You tried to steal family's land. When you did that, you decided we were a business. So let's do business. My mother stood up, her face flushing a deep, angry red. The soft mother mask cracked and fell away, revealing the steel that lay beneath. You ungrateful child, she hissed. After everything we gave you, the education, the clothes on your back, this is how you repay us, by holding us hostage. I am not holding you hostage, I said calm. I am holding you accountable. She slammed her hand down on the table. You are destroying it, she screamed. You are destroying the legacy. You are going to ruin everything your father built. You are going to ruin Troy's future. The room went silent. There it was. She did not say our future. She did not say the family's future. She said Troy's future. Even now, with their backs against the wall, with me holding the only asset that could save them, they still saw the ranch as belonging to him. I was just the obstacle in his path. I was the debris on the road to his coronation. I looked at my mother, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel the need to please her. I felt a profound, heavy pity. I picked up their folder, the one with the fake reports and the insulting 5% offer, and I held it out to her. I think you should leave, I said. My father stood up slowly. He looked at the contract I had put on the table. Morgan, he said, his voice low. If you do not sign those papers, the bank might call the loan. We could lose the ranch, all of it. Then maybe you should not have lied to the bank, I said. He stared at me for a long moment, searching for the little girl who used to follow him around in rubber boots. He did not find her. He grabbed the folder from my hand. Come on, Evelyn, he said to my mother. They walked out. My mother was sobbing again, but this time it was not a performance. It was the terrified sound of a woman who realizes her manipulation has finally run out of ammunition. I watched them get into the black SUV. I watched the dust rise as they turned around and drove away, back down the bumpy road toward the house they thought they owned. I closed the door. I locked it. I leaned my back against the wood and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. My heart was hammering in my chest like a trapped bird. My hands were shaking so hard, I had to clasp them together to stop it. It hurts. God, it hurts to look your parents in the face and realize they would sell you down the river to save their golden child. But as I sat there in the silence of my cabin, listening to the wind rattle the window pane, I realized something else. They had come here to buy my silence. They had come here to trade a few scraps of affection for my soul, and for the first time in 34 years, I did not sell. I stood up, walked to the fridge, and poured myself a glass of cold water. I drank it slowly. The deadline was 48 hours away. They had my terms. Now, they had to decide what was more important to them, their pride or their thirst. The venue for the execution of the Callahan legacy was not a courtroom. It was a rented conference room at the Holiday Inn Express on the edge of town. A room that smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and stale coffee. The bank had called this a risk review meeting. In the corporate world, that is polite code for we are terrified you are about to lose our money, and we want answers right now. I arrived 10 minutes early with Naomi. We took the seats on the left side of the long, faux mahogany table. Naomi arranged her files with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. She did not say a word. She just placed a single, encrypted hard drive on the table in front of her. At 5 minutes to 9, the door opened. Troy walked in first. He was wearing a brand new denim shirt, pressed so sharply the creases could cut skin. and a pair of boots that looked like they had been distressed by a machine rather than actual dirt. He was trying to project the image of the modern, rugged CEO, but I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. My parents followed him. My mother refused to look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on the blank projector screen at the end of the room. My father looked tired, his face a shade of gray that matched his hair. They sat on the right side, putting as much distance between us as the table allowed. At the head of the table sat Mr. Henderson, the senior loan officer from Western Highland Bank, and two men in gray suits, who I assumed were from the private equity firm. Henderson looked like a man who had not slept in 3 days. "Let us get started," Henderson said. Skipping the pleasantries, he tapped a thick stack of papers in front of him. "As of this morning, we have received a formal notice of license expiration regarding the water rights for Callahan Ranch. We have also received a counteroffer for a commercial lease from Ms. Brooks." He looked at Troy. "Mr. Callahan, you assured us on Monday that this was a minor administrative error. You stated that the ranch holds perpetual rights to the water. Please explain why the county records disagree with you." Troy leaned back in his chair, flashing a charming, practiced smile. He laced his fingers behind his head. "Mr. Henderson, listen," Troy said, his voice smooth. "I understand why you are nervous, but you have to understand the context here. This is not a business dispute. It is a family squabble. My sister is well. She is going through a difficult transition." He gestured vaguely toward me, as if I were a piece of broken furniture. "Morgan is upset because she was removed from the management team." Troy continued, "This notice. It is a tantrum. It is a leverage play. She knows she cannot actually cut off the water. No judge would allow it. She is just trying to make noise to get a better severance package. We are letting her blow off some steam, and then we will sign a nominal agreement. It is a non-issue." He looked around the room, inviting the men to share in his dismissal of the hysterical woman. Henderson did not smile. He looked at Naomi. "Ms. Delgado," Henderson asked, "is your client simply blowing off steam?" Naomi stood up. She did not smile either. She walked over to the laptop connected to the projector and plugged in the hard drive. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice cool and professional, "we are not here to discuss my client's feelings. We are here to discuss physics and geography." She clicked a button. A map appeared on the screen. It was a satellite view of the entire valley. A bright red line outlined the North Spring parcel in the center. "This is the property owned by Morgan Brooks," Naomi said. She clicked again. Blue lines appeared, overlaying the map. "These are your water lines," she said. She clicked a third time. Yellow dots appeared. "These are your active wells." The room was silent. The visual was devastating. It showed clearly that 90% of the ranch's water infrastructure was located inside the red box. Naomi turned to the bankers. "Callahan Ranch does not own the water. They do not own the pipes. They do not own the road. And as of 48 hours from now, they will not have a license to use them. This is not a tantrum. This is an eviction notice for your collateral." Troy scoffed. He slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. We have been using that water for 50 years. Common usage laws apply. She cannot just take it back because she is jealous. That brings us to the second point." Naomi cut in, her voice slicing through his bluster. She advanced the slide. The screen changed. On the left side was a scan of my driver's license signature. It was sharp, angular, and jagged. On the right side was a scan of the water stability report submitted to the bank 6 months ago. The signature reading Morgan E. Brooks was round, looped, and soft for the last 3 years, Naomi said, looking directly at the private equity investors. "Callahan Ranch has submitted environmental compliance reports claiming that the aquifer levels were stable and the herd size was sustainable. These reports were the basis for your continued lending. They were purportedly signed by the certified environmental manager. My client?" She paused. "My client did not sign them." My father made a small, choking sound. My mother went rigid in her chair. Troy's face turned a violent shade of red. "That proves nothing. Signatures vary. She probably signed it in a hurry. You are grasping at straws. Naomi ignored him. She looked at the door. We would like to call a witness, she said. The door opened. A small, elderly woman walked in. She was clutching a purse tightly with both hands. It was Mrs. Gable. She had been the ranch's administrative assistant for 20 years. She had known me since I was in braces. She looked terrified. Mrs. Gable sat in the chair Naomi offered her. Mrs. Gable, Naomi asked gently, do you recognize the document on the screen? Mrs. Gable looked at the projector. Her chin quivered. Yes, she whispered. Did Morgan Brooks sign that document? No. Who signed it? Mrs. Gable looked down at her hands. She did not look at my parents. Mrs. Callahan asked me to do it, she said, her voice barely audible. She told me that Morgan was too busy in the field to come into the office. She told me to take Morgan's signature from an old Christmas card and use the scanner to paste it onto the report. She said it was just paperwork. She said it did not matter. The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush a lung. I looked at my mother. She was staring at Mrs. Gable with a look of pure, unadulterated betrayal. She had expected loyalty from the help. Even after asking them to commit a felony, Naomi was not done. She turned back to the laptop. We have established that the collateral is compromised and the compliance data is forged, Naomi said. But Mr. Callahan claims this is all just a misunderstanding. He claims he respects his sister. She opened an audio file. One final exhibit. She said, this is a voicemail left by Troy Callahan on the phone of Mr. Lewis, a potential investor. 3 days ago, Mr. Lewis was concerned about the rumors of a water dispute and forwarded this to us. She pressed play. Troy's voice boomed through the conference room speakers. It was loud, arrogant, and unmistakably him. Lewis, buddy, relax. Do not listen to the noise. The sister Morgan, she is a nobody. She is a nerd with a map. She is going to sign whatever I put in front of her because she has no backbone. She owes this family everything. I own her. I own the land. Just write the check, and I will handle the little girl. The recording ended. I sat there, staring at the table, hearing it out loud, hearing my brother describe me as property, as a nobody he could control was a strange sensation. You would think it would hurt, and it did. Somewhere deep down in the part of me that still wanted a big brother, but mostly, it felt like a key turning in a lock. It was the final release. Any lingering guilt I had about destroying the ranch, any hesitation about hurting the family, evaporated. He did not see me as a sister. He saw me as an obstacle to be bulldozed. I looked up. Everyone in the room was looking at Troy. Troy was pale now. The confidence was gone. He looked like a child who had been caught standing over a broken vase. That was taken out of context. He stammered, I was just selling. You know how it is? You have to project confidence, Mr. Henderson stood up. He did not look at Troy. He looked at me. Ms. Brooks, he said. His tone had changed completely. It was no longer the tone of a man talking to a nuisance. It was the tone of a man talking to the only person in the room who held any cards. The bank is in a very difficult position, Henderson said. If what you are saying is true, and it certainly appears to be, then the ranch is currently in default on multiple covenants, fraud, material misrepresentation, lack of collateral. He paused. However, foreclosure is a messy process. It destroys value. If we call the loan today, the ranch shuts down, the cattle lose value, everyone loses money. He leaned forward. Are you willing to step in? If we remove the current management, if we remove your brother, would you be willing to take over operations and stabilize the asset? We could work out a restructuring deal. I looked at Henderson, then I looked at my parents. They were looking at me with sudden, desperate hope. They thought this was the solution. They thought I would save them. They thought I would jump at the chance to be the boss and fix their mess, just like I had always done. I looked at Troy. He was glaring at me, hatred burning in his eyes, but he was silent. I stood up. Mr. Henderson, I said clearly, I appreciate the offer, but you are asking me to captain a ship that has already hit the iceberg. I pointed to the screen, to the forged reports. The damage they have done to the land is not just numbers on a page. The aquifer is depleted. The soil is compacted. To fix this ranch, you would need to cut the herd by 60%. You would need to stop all operations for 3 years to let the grass recover. That means no revenue. That means no profit. I shook my head. I will not run Callahan Ranch. I said, I will not attach my name to their failure. Then what do you want? Henderson asked. I want to be a landlord. I said, I picked up the lease agreement I had prepared, the one with the strict water limits and the high fees. I am willing to sign a temporary water lease with the bank directly, to keep the cattle alive during the liquidation process. I said, but I will not sign it with Troy, and I will not sign it with my parents. I will deal only with the receivership. I looked at my family one last time. The free ride is over. Henderson nodded slowly. He understood. He turned to the 2 men in suits. Gentlemen, I think we have seen enough. He turned back to Troy and my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Callahan. Mr. Troy Callahan. As of this moment, Western Highland Bank is freezing all operating accounts associated with the ranch. We are issuing a notice of default. We will be appointing an independent forensic auditor to review every transaction from the last 5 years. Troy stood up so fast, his chair tipped over backward. You cannot do this, he screamed. Do you know who we are? We are the Callahans. You cannot just shut us down because of her. He pointed a shaking finger at me. She is lying. She rigged this. She is trying to steal my company. Henderson did not even blink. It is not your company anymore. Son, Henderson said coldly, it is the bank's company, and right now, the only asset of value is the water your sister owns. Troy looked at me. His face twisted into a mask of pure ugliness. I hope you are happy, he spat. You killed us. You killed the family. I looked him in the eye, my pulse steady, my voice calm. I did not kill it. Troy, I just stopped giving it life support. Troy let out a sound of incoherent rage and stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the projector screen wobbled. My parents did not move. They sat there, slumped in their chairs. My mother was weeping silently into her hands. My father was staring at the table, his mouth slightly open, as if he could not comprehend how the world had shifted so violently beneath his feet. They had spent their lives worshiping the idea of the Callahan Empire. They had sacrificed their integrity, their land, and their daughter to build a pedestal for their son. And now, in the harsh fluorescent light of a hotel conference room, they were finally seeing the truth. The pedestal was hollow, the son was a fraud, and the daughter they had thrown away was the only one left standing. Naomi unplugged the hard drive. The screen went black. Shall we go? She asked me. I nodded. I walked past my parents. I did not stop to comfort them. I did not stop to explain. There was nothing left to say. As I walked out into the hallway, leaving them alone with the bankers and the ruin they had created, I took the first deep breath I had taken in years. The air smelled of hotel carpet and coffee, but to me, it smelled like rain. The silence that followed the bank hearing was not the peaceful silence of the high desert. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a hospital waiting room where the family knows the patient is not going to make it, but no one is brave enough to sign the do not resuscitate order. For 3 weeks, the ranch hung in limbo. The bank had frozen the operating accounts. The feed trucks stopped coming. The seasonal hands, sensing the collapse, had packed up their pickups and drifted away to other jobs in Wyoming or Montana. Then, the letter arrived. It came to my lawyer, Naomi, not to the ranch. It was a formal offer from Western Highland Bank to restructure the debt. It was their way of saying that they were willing to perform emergency surgery on the patient, but only if I agreed to hold the scalpel. I sat in Naomi's office, reading the terms. The bank was pragmatic. They did not care about family feelings. They cared about the $20 million they had loaned to a sinking ship. They were willing to unfreeze the accounts and extend the loan maturity. But they had 2 non-negotiable conditions. First, the water rights from the North Spring parcel had to be secured via a long-term, binding lease with the landowner. That was me. Second, the management team responsible for the fraud and the environmental degradation had to be removed. Naomi looked at me across her glass desk. "This is it. Morgan," she said. "This is the kill shot. They are giving you the power to dictate the terms of surrender." We spent the next 6 hours drafting the reorganization and lease agreement. It was a thick document, dense with clauses about acre-feet usage, soil recovery metrics, and riparian buffer zones. I set the lease rate for the water at fair market value 4 cents per gallon for the first tier, rising to 8 cents if they exceeded the sustainable cap. I demanded the money be paid directly from the bank to me, bypassing the ranch's accounts entirely so Troy could not touch it. But the hardest part was Clause 8. Clause 8 was the amputation. It stated that as a condition of the lease, the operational control of Callahan Ranch would be transferred to an independent board of managers, consisting of 1 bank representative, 1 independent agricultural expert, and me. Troy Callahan would be removed as CEO immediately. He would retain his ownership shares, but he would have no voting power, no salary, and no authority to give orders to so much as a stable boy. I stared at the words on the screen. Removal of executive officer. It felt cold. It felt cruel. But then I thought about the forged signatures. I thought about the cattle bellowing in thirst at my fence line because he refused to reduce the herd size. I thought about the 4 feet of water we had lost in the aquifer in less than a month. It is like gangrene. I thought, you can love the leg all you want. You can remember how strong it used to be. But if the tissue is dead and the infection is spreading, you cut it off or the whole body dies. I looked at Naomi. "Print it," I said. 2 days later, I drove to the main house. I did not take Naomi. I did not take a bodyguard. This was the final conversation, and it had to happen where it all started. The house felt abandoned. The landscaping crew had been let go weeks ago, and the perfectly manicured lawn that Troy was so proud of was turning a sickly shade of yellow. The fountain in the driveway was dry, a ring of white mineral deposits staining the stone. I walked into the kitchen. My parents were sitting at the round oak table where we used to eat breakfast before school. Troy was leaning against the granite island, drinking a beer at 10 in the morning. They looked up when I entered. The air in the room was so thick with tension it felt hard to breathe. I placed the document on the table. "This is the lifeline," I said. My voice was quiet. I did not want to shout. There was no energy left for shouting. My father reached for it. His hands were shaking. He put on his reading glasses and began to scan the pages. My mother read over his shoulder. I watched their faces. I watched the hope flicker in their eyes when they saw the section about the bank unfreezing the accounts. They saw a future where the ranch survived. They saw a way out. Then they reached Clause 8. My mother gasped. She pulled back as if the paper had burned her. "Morgan," she whispered, "you cannot be serious." My father looked up, his face pale. "You want to remove him?" he asked. "You want to fire your own brother from his own company?" I did not look at Troy. I kept my eyes on my father. He is not capable of running this ranch. "Dad," I said, "the bank knows it. The investors know it. And deep down, you know it too. He committed fraud. He destroyed the water table. If we leave him in charge, there will be no ranch left in 6 months. The bank will foreclose, and we will lose everything. But he is the face of the ranch," my mother cried out. She walked over to Troy and put her arm around him, shielding him like he was a toddler. "He is a Callahan. You cannot just kick him out. It would humiliate him." I looked at her. "Mom," I said, "the ranch is insolvent. The cattle are starving. We are facing federal fines for the water reporting. And you are worried about his embarrassment." My father pushed the paper back toward me. "We can negotiate this," he said, his voice pleading. "We can compromise. Keep the water fees. Charge us whatever you want. We will pay it. But leave Troy in the title. Make him a figurehead if you have to, but do not strip him of the name. It is his legacy." I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It was the old wound, tearing open one last time. Even now, standing in the ruins of their own making, they were willing to pay any price: financial ruin, legal exposure. the death of the land itself just to protect Troy's ego. They would rather burn the house down than admit the golden boy had played with matches. I shook my head slowly. No, I said, that is the deal. It is non-negotiable. The bank will not restructure the debt if Troy is signing the checks. They do not trust him. I looked at Troy then. He had not said a word. He was staring at the document on the table with a look of pure, concentrated venom. Troy, I said, please, read the room. If you step down, you keep your shares, you keep your equity. When we turn the ranch around, when the grass comes back, you will still make money. You just have to let go of the wheel. Troy laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. He pushed himself off the counter and walked over to the table. He picked up the agreement. He looked at me, and his eyes were empty. There was no brother there. There was only a desperate, cornered narcissist. You really think you have won, don't you? He sneered. You think because you have a little piece of dirt and a lawyer that you can walk in here and tell me what to do. He held up the document. The bank needs us. Morgan, he said, they need the Callahan brand. They need the story. Nobody buys beef from a spreadsheet. They buy the cowboy. They buy the dream. Without me, this place is just dirt and cows. I am the value. He is not the value. I thought, he is the liability, but he was too blind to see it. Troy, do not, I said. He ripped the paper in half. The sound was loud in the quiet kitchen. Rip. He put the halves together and ripped them again. There is your deal, he said, throwing the confetti of legal paper onto the floor at my feet. Go back to your little cabin. Go back to your charts. I am not stepping down. I am Callahan Ranch, and I would rather see this place burn to ash than let you take it from me. My parents did not say a word. They watched him destroy the only thing that could save them, and they stayed silent. They chose him. They chose the sickness over the cure. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the torn paper on the linoleum floor. I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was the feeling of a weight finally being lifted. I had spent 7 years trying to save them. I had spent the last 2 months trying to force them to save themselves. I had tried to be the structural support for a building that wanted to collapse. And now I realized you cannot save someone who does not want to be saved. You cannot force survival on people who are in love with their own destruction. I knelt down. I did not do it dramatically. I just knelt down and began to pick up the pieces of paper. I gathered them into a neat pile. I was not going to leave a mess. I was done cleaning up their messes, but I would clean up my own. I stood up and put the torn paper in my pocket. I looked at my parents. My father had his head in his hands. My mother was staring out the window, refusing to look at the reality in the room. I am sorry, I said. My mother turned to me, her eyes flashing with a sudden, irrational anger. You did this, she hissed. You forced his hand. You cornered him. No, Mom, I said softly. I opened the door. He chose to slam it. I walked to the back door. My hand hovered over the brass knob, the same knob I had turned 1,000 times coming in from school, coming in from chores, coming into a family I thought loved me. I turned back one last time. The ranch could have lived. I said, the soil is resilient. The grass wants to grow, but it cannot grow under this weight. I looked at Troy, who was opening another beer, his back to me. The land is honest. I said to their backs, it does not care about your brand. It does not care about your ego. It only cares about the water and the work. It will tell us who is right. You just have to wait for the harvest. I opened the door and walked out. The heat hit me, dry and relentless. I walked to my truck. I did not look back at the house. I did not look at the dry fountain. I started the engine and drove down the long, winding driveway. As I reached the main gate, the sun was setting. It cast a long, golden light on the massive wooden sign that hung over the entrance. Callahan Ranch, Est, 1920. It looked majestic. It looked permanent. But I knew better. I knew that in 30 days, the bank would file the foreclosure paperwork. I knew that the foreclosure auctions would follow. I knew that the cattle would be seized, and I knew that the next time I drove through this gate, that sign would be gone. I turned onto the county road, headed toward the North Spring. I had offered them a life raft. They had poked a hole in it to spite me. So be it. I drove toward my land, where the water was still flowing, and left them to the drought they had chosen. The end of the Callahan Empire did not come with a bang. It did not come with a dramatic fire or a shootout like in the Western movies my brother loved so much. It came with the quiet, rhythmic sound of a staple gun punching through plywood. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 32 days after Troy had torn my settlement offer into confetti on the kitchen floor. I was standing on the ridge of the North Spring parcel, looking down at the main entrance of the ranch. Beside me stood Naomi, my lawyer, and Mr. Henderson from the bank. We were watching a crew of men in orange vests erect a massive sign right next to the historic limestone archway that my great-grandfather had built. The sign was white with bold red lettering. Notice of foreclosure sale. Public auction, all assets of Callahan Ranch, LLC, land, structures, equipment, and brand intellectual property. The wind was blowing from the north, carrying the dry, dusty smell of the overgrazed lower pastures up to us. From where we stood, the difference in the land was stark. Like a line drawn with a ruler. On my side of the fence, the grass was recovering, turning a soft, resilient sage green thanks to the careful water management I had implemented immediately after the split. On their side, the earth was brown, cracked, and exhausted. They finally ran out of time, Henderson said, adjusting his sunglasses. He sounded tired. Foreclosing on a heritage ranch is never something we want to do. Morgan, it is bad PR for the bank, but we had no choice. The forensic audit showed that the ranch has been technically insolvent for 18 months. The only thing keeping it afloat was the fraudulent collateral reporting. I nodded. I did not feel happy. I did not feel a rush of victory. I just felt a profound sense of relief, like setting down a heavy backpack I had been carrying for a decade. The auction was scheduled for 10 in the morning. By 9:30, the vultures had arrived. That is what we call them in the business. They are the land developers from the city, looking to chop the pastures into 5-acre ranchettes for retirees. They are the corporate agricultural conglomerates, looking to buy the brand name and slap it on frozen steaks. And they are the neighbors, the other ranchers who had watched the Callahans strut around for years, now coming to pick the bones for cheap equipment. At 9:45, the black SUV arrived. My family was late to their own funeral. I watched through my binoculars as Troy got out of the car. He was not wearing his cowboy hat today. He was wearing a suit, but it looked disheveled, as if he had slept in it. My parents followed him, looking small and frail. They walked past the foreclosure sign without looking at it, keeping their heads down as they made their way toward the cluster of auctioneers and lawyers near the main barn. "Shall we go down?" Naomi asked. "Let us go," I said. We drove down the access road, my road, and parked near the crowd. A hush fell over the group when I stepped out of the truck. Everyone knew the story by now. In a small town, a water war is juicier gossip than a murder. They knew I was the one holding the keys. I walked over to stand near the auctioneer's podium. I did not approach my family. They were standing off to the side, surrounded by a few sympathetic friends, but mostly alone. Troy was pacing back and forth, talking rapidly into his phone, still trying to find a miracle. The auctioneer, a man with a fast, rhythmic voice and a cowboy hat that actually looked used, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Today we are offering the assets of Callahan Ranch LLC. This sale is absolute. We are selling the lower 3,000 acres, the primary residence, the commercial barns, and the trademarked brand." He paused, looking over his reading glasses at the crowd. "However, there is a material disclosure that all bidders must understand before we begin." He gestured toward Mr. Henderson. Henderson stepped forward. He held up a map, the same map Naomi had shown in the boardroom. "The property up for auction today does not include the water rights known as the North Spring," Henderson announced, his voice carrying clearly over the wind. "Furthermore, the property up for auction does not include the primary access road to the summer pastures. These assets are privately owned by an adjacent party. A murmur went through the crowd. The developers looked at each other, confused. The neighboring ranchers nodded knowingly. Henderson continued, "The current water license has expired. Any prospective buyer should be aware that there is currently no water agreement in place for the lower pastures. You are buying the land and the buildings. If you want water, you will have to negotiate a new commercial lease with the owner of the North Spring parcel. Ms. Morgan Brooks." He pointed to me. Every head in the crowd turned. I stood tall, keeping my face neutral. I was not there to gloat. I was there to represent the reality of the land. Suddenly, a voice cracked through the tension. "This is illegal!" Troy broke through the line of people. His face was purple with rage. He stormed toward the auctioneer's podium, ignoring my father's attempt to grab his arm. "You cannot sell it like this," Troy screamed, pointing at the bank representatives. "You are devaluing the asset. You are letting her hold the sale hostage. That water belongs to the ranch. It has always belonged to the ranch." He spun around to face the crowd, spreading his arms wide. "Do not listen to them. This is a scam. My sister stole the deed. She is trying to bankrupt us out of spite because she did not get the CEO job. This is theft." The crowd was uncomfortable. People looked away. It was embarrassing to watch a man unravel in public. Mr. Henderson stepped in front of Troy. He was not a large man, but he had the weight of the institution behind him. "Mr. Callahan." "Step back," Henderson said coldly. "I will not step back," Troy yelled. He looked at me, his eyes wild. "You did this. Morgan, you destroyed 100 years of history. Are you happy now? You burned it all down." I looked at him. I looked at the brother who had mocked my degree, who had erased my work, and who had torn up the only lifeline I had offered him. I walked forward until I was standing just a few feet away from him. The crowd parted for me. "I did not burn it down. Troy," I said. My voice was calm, but it carried in the silence. "I offered you a hose. You chose to cut it because you did not like the person holding the handle." I pointed to the dry brown hills behind the barn. "Look at the land," I said. "It is dying. You killed it to buy fancy trucks and film commercials. The bank isn't taking the ranch because of me. They are taking it because you went bankrupt trying to pretend you were a cowboy instead of actually being a rancher." Troy opened his mouth to scream again, but Henderson cut him off. "That is enough," Henderson said sharply. "Sheriff, please escort Mr. Callahan off the auction block so we can proceed." 2 deputies stepped forward. They were men I had gone to high school with. They looked apologetic, but they took Troy by the arms. "Get off me," Troy shouted as they dragged him toward the parking lot. "You are all making a mistake. I am the CEO. I am Callahan Ranch." My parents watched him go. My mother was sobbing into a handkerchief. My father looked like a ghost. He looked at me for 1 second, just a fleeting glance, and in his eyes, I saw something that looked like fear. He finally understood that the power dynamic had shifted forever. The auction proceeded. It was brutal and fast. The land sold for 60 cents on the dollar. The brand, the glorious Callahan legacy, sold for a fraction of what Troy thought it was worth. But here's the twist. The buyer was not a developer. It was not a meat corporation. The winning bidder was a consortium of local investors partnering with a regional land trust, and standing right next to their representative was Mr. Henderson. After the gavel fell, Henderson walked over to me. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "the new ownership group is very aware of the water situation. They have no interest in trying to run a traditional, high-density cattle operation. They have seen your data. They know the land needs to rest." He handed me a card. "They want to hire you," he said, "not as a manager, as a partner. They want to lease the North Spring water, but they also want to contract with your consulting firm to rehabilitate the lower 3,000 acres. They want to turn the ranch into a research station for sustainable agriculture and regenerative grazing." I looked at the card. It was a new beginning. It was exactly the kind of work I had wanted to do 7 years ago. Before I got sucked into saving my family's ego, I accepted the card. "We can talk," I said, "but the water rates are non-negotiable." Henderson smiled for the first time. "We expected nothing less." 3 months later, the heat of summer had finally broken, replaced by the crisp, golden light of autumn. I drove my truck down the main access road. It was no longer a road of contention, it was just a road. I pulled over at the entrance to the North Spring parcel. The old, rusted barbed wire fence had been replaced with wildlife-friendly smooth wire. The land behind it was recovering, the native grasses were coming back, pushing up through the crust of the drought. I walked to the back of my truck and pulled out a new wooden sign. It was simple. I had carved it myself. I took down the temporary private property sign I had put up during the legal battle. I drilled the new sign into the post. North Spring Range, stewarded by Morgan Brooks, Est, 2024. I stepped back to look at it. Stewarded, not owned. My grandfather was right. You never really own the land. You just hold it for a while. If you take care of it, it takes care of you. If you try to conquer it, it breaks you. I heard the sound of a car engine approaching. I turned to see a sedan driving slowly down the county road. It was a generic rental car. As it got closer, I saw the driver. It was Troy. He looked different. The cowboy hat was gone. He was wearing a baseball cap and a polo shirt. He looked like any other tourist passing through. He looked smaller. He slowed down as he passed the gate. He looked at the sign. Then he looked at me. I did not know what he was doing out here. Maybe he was saying goodbye. Maybe he was looking for someone to blame one last time. His eyes met mine. There was anger there. Yes, but there was also a deep, hollow regret. He looked at the green grass on my side of the fence, and then at the brown stubble on the side he used to rule. I did not wave. I did not smile. I simply reached up and tipped the brim of my hat. It was a small gesture. In the West, it means I see you. It means, go in peace. But it also means, keep moving. Troy hesitated for a second, his foot hovering on the brake. Then, he looked away, pressed the gas, and the sedan accelerated, kicking up a cloud of dust as it disappeared down the road toward the highway. He was gone. I turned back to the land. I walked through the gate and hiked up the hill to the spring. The water was flowing strong now. The rehabilitation plan was working. The level in the trough was high and clear, reflecting the blue sky. I knelt down beside the water. It was cold and clean. I dipped my hand in. I thought about the last 10 years. I thought about the fights, the late nights, the tears, the feeling of being small and invisible in my own home. I thought about the family I had lost. But then I looked around. I saw a hawk circling overhead. I saw a herd of elk grazing on the far ridge. I saw the wind rippling through the wheatgrass like waves on an ocean. I had lost a family that saw me as a servant, but I had gained a world that saw me as a partner. My grandfather had left me a test. He wanted to know if I had the strength to choose the truth over the lie, even when the lie was wearing the face of people I loved. I stood up and wiped my wet hand on my jeans. They had planted greed on this land, hoping to harvest gold. They ended up with dust. I had planted honesty. It had been a hard, lonely season of growing. But looking at the water flowing from the rock, steady and eternal, I knew one thing for sure. The harvest was going to be good. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Morgan and her battle for the North Spring. If you enjoyed this story of justice and resilience, please let us know in the comments where you are listening from. I would love to see how far this story has traveled. Don't forget to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach more people who need a reminder that sometimes the quiet ones hold all the power. See you in the next story.